Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Joan Ferrini-Mundy, the president here and at the University of Maine at Machias, and I'm delighted to welcome you all. So thrilled that so many of you are here for what I think is going to be one of our most exciting adventures together starting this semester. So we're here, Provost Hecker and I, to talk to you about our ideas for moving forward on an initiative that we're calling provisionally the Strategic Vision and Values Initiative. You know, a new president comes to a university and one of the first things she gets asked is, well, when are you starting strategic planning? And so you have to have an answer to that. But the University of Maine has had a wonderful strategic plan. The Blue Sky Plan was one of the first documents that I read when I was interested in this position. I was impressed by its thoughtfulness, its thoroughness, the way in which it had involved apparently a large swath of stakeholders from across the university and the state. It was just a very, very strong plan with a lot of detail and some pieces that I thought were especially forward-looking. The identification of what were they? The signature and emerging areas, thank you, as well as a lot of very Maine-specific kinds of goals that seemed important. So that's been a great tool, and I know that the university has spent time both working to address the issues in the plan and to implement, but also to assess how things went. So this conversation starts from there. I assure you we're not beginning with yet another start-from-scratch strategic plan, and we'll talk about that. The other thing we want to be sure to say is that we asked you to bring your cell phones, so that we're not going to say now turn your cell phones off, as often happens in these kinds of things. We're going to say turn them on. You've got a card on your chair that explains how we really intend to model, beginning this second, that this is a dialogue and a conversation across our community. So we would like for you to look at the instructions here. You can submit questions or comments at any time during our presentations. Now, the downside of this is you can look like you're submitting questions and you're just checking your email. So, you know, please don't do that. Please actually submit questions, because we have a team in the back of the room who will see these questions and comments. If you'd like to write something a little longer, you need to go to the website here on the left. If you have something that's, what is it, Peter, 140 characters or less, you can then do that as a text. Okay, everybody got that? So you're all set to go, because we really do want to start this right away today as a discussion. Okay, so I'm going to say just a little bit about my take on the national picture in which we find ourselves as a university. And it's a fascinating one, and I think one where the University of Maine and the University of Maine at Machias are well positioned to be major contributors and to have distinctive roles as we go ahead. First of all, this is a slide actually that comes from the National Science Foundation. It's a project I worked on there with a lot of colleagues, where NSF decided it was important enough to focus on this in terms of what we might be seeking, what they might be seeking for future research efforts. And the title of the initiative was The Future of Work at the Human Technology Frontier. And why it was interesting, to me at least at NSF, was that NSF often is very open in what it calls for. It doesn't give a lot of specificity in terms of what they're seeking to fund. But this one was quite directive. This was to say, we know that there are so many drivers for change in our society right now, that our work, all of our collective work, our work as faculty in universities, our work as engineers in production facilities, and everything else will be changing because of technology. And that's not really, you know, it's not an if any longer. It's a kind of a when. And so because that work is changing, there are several drivers that are causing that to happen. First of all, and this all comes from a report by the World Economic Forum that just came out earlier this year, the high-speed internet is ubiquitous. These are things we all know, but I'm putting them here as context for our discussions. Artificial intelligence, widespread use of big data and analytics, and cloud technology. So those drivers are there. They are ubiquitous. And I think as we think about our role in the state of Maine and beyond in the preparation of our students, it's important to have a little bit of that context in mind. There is increased demand for a whole host of professions, many of them with brand new titles that we'd have never thought about even 5 years ago as we move into this world of change. And so we have an interesting opportunity as an institution of higher education, because we have multiple responsibilities. Of course, we have foundational responsibilities. We're a research university. We produce new knowledge. We create theory. We build concepts. We do creative production and other scholarship. And so that's there. At the same time, the world is changing around us, and so how do we make sure that our students are well prepared for that world? And that's a big consideration for us. At the same time as this piece of context is swirling around, we see also that universities around the country, and I've just picked 3 to focus on here, but there are many others, are taking on roles of being national or even global universities. They are producing fascinating documents. I would recommend in particular taking a look, if you have a moment, at the Georgia Tech document, which is called Deliberate Innovation Lifetime Education. These are strategic plan kinds of, that is a strategic plan type of document, and they offer a whole new set of initiatives that they intend to pursue. And I wanted to just mention 2 that I have found quite interesting. One is the idea that universities should be in the business today, and this is a Georgia Tech process that, you know, was built over many months, of considering new products and new services as we think about a new type of student and learner at our institutions. And so the new products and new services, the examples they give: micro-credentials, mini-mester classes, competency-based education, blockchain-based evidence of learning, and achievements that can be made into employer-relevant credentials. You're aware of these trends, I'm sure. The notions that universities need to be more nimble, need to be more responsive, and more relevant for certain audiences in light of these changing parts of the national context, international context. Arizona State University, with its phenomenal work in innovation, named for the 4th year in a row by U.S. News and World Report as the United States' most innovative university, and they're doing fascinating things. Purdue Global in the online world, and those are just a few examples. So I think having them out there is helpful, at least in my thinking, in terms of how we might go ahead in our strategic values and vision activity with an eye toward the role that the University of Maine and the University of Maine at Machias will play, and the place we will take in this national and international discussion. So just a little bit about the context in the state of Maine, which of course I'm new to. Most of you are not, so bear with me if I don't get this quite right, but I'm trying hard to learn about our state because, of course, we are the state land-grant university, and being mindful of the context in the state is really quite crucial. Just a few key points. First of all, we see a projected decrease in high school graduates in the state of Maine. And that's kind of an alarming graph in my view. Maine is the state with the highest median age in the nation. It's the state where last year the reports indicate that there were more deaths than births in the state. So we have a reality of a declining demographic that is a part of, needs to be, in my opinion, a part of our thinking as we look toward our future. Oops. We also have the very interesting Making Maine Work report that perhaps you've seen. This was built as essentially a survey that would provide direction and recommendations really to incoming governor and legislators. And one of their goals is this very interesting, excuse me, grow the skills of Maine's workforce so that 60% of Maine workers have a credential of value by 2025. Okay, so just a little bit about the current data there, and another bit of information from the World Economic Forum. World Economic Forum projects that by 2022, and this is worldwide now, at least 54% of all employees will require significant reskilling and upskilling. So this is a part of the changing nature of our potential learner audience, because there will be this ongoing kind of continuing education need that's related to the workforce. And that's going to be the case in Maine as well, as folks project. So this notion of credentials of value, I think, is an interesting idea. What does that mean in the context of a university or of a research university? What does it mean beyond our traditional degrees? And how can we think about where we might be of use to the state in that arena? And then finally, of course, we see so much news about the shifts in the economy. Lots to read about this, lots to understand about this in the state of Maine. I did go and look at the Maine Department of Labor information from their Center for Workforce Research and Information. And they list, they have many, many wonderful, well, I guess you have to be the type that likes graphs, but I do. Lots of data about various projections for the state of Maine that are quite interesting. And the one that I wanted wanted to highlight for you is about the 25 occupations with the fastest projected rate of job growth in Maine. And now I want to pause here and be very clear. We are a research university. We are a university that has national and international presence. We need to be a research university that is about building new knowledge, creating new scholarship for the future. I understand all of that, and you'll find that I'm very attentive to that particular part of our mission. At the same time, we are the land-grant university for the state of Maine. And so I think we have a very interesting dual role that was well reflected in the Blue Sky Plan, and I want to just reiterate it here. So as we think about the shifting economy, the 6 professions that are projected for the fastest rate of growth, over 20% in the next 8 years or so, are the following: statisticians, physician assistants, nurse practitioners, information security analysts, software developers and applications, and operations research analysts. So you do see a bit of a theme, and you do see how those earlier drivers about changes in technology are related to what we see as job growth potential in Maine. So I do think, again, for the current work in vision and values, having this in the background is quite important. Reminder about what it means to be a land grant. We are also a sea grant, and we are also a space grant university, and some of you probably know that. But there's this very strong focus on liberal and practical education in the original Morrill Act language, and then this notion in sort of a more recent version about advancing and sharing research, education, and training to advance the state economically, culturally, and socially. So it's part of our mission, it's part of what we do, and as I'm getting to learn about the university, I can see it all the time in work that you all are doing, in work that is both applied and theoretical, applied and basic, that is meant to, or that ultimately has the impact of a return on investment of some form in this state. Even more importantly, perhaps, than that is the fact that the students who come through here are experiencing what it is to be educated as undergraduates in classrooms where their faculty members are scholars, researchers, creators, and those students benefit from that in ways that I think are unique to us as a research university. So all of that as background. We have worked with the One University concept. Those of you who were here at the session with the Chancellor last week heard some further discussion about what that means. At the same time, we have a Board of Trustees very, very proactive and interested in some of the same things we've just been talking about: the workforce for the state of Maine, the importance of college attainment, and the importance of recognizing that we do have a changing post-secondary market. That's the context, or at least my take on the context, for what we have as we go into this activity. We also have some new features here. The Blue Sky Outcomes Report, great document if you haven't read that. And that document highlights the wonderful features of the Blue Sky work. It talks about so many accomplishments and changes that were made here along the lines of what was recommended in the Blue Sky work. The budget processes privileged the signature areas, and we were able to see some growth in those areas in a variety of ways. So the plan served an important set of purposes. The plan also has this assessment document where 3 ideas were mentioned in terms of how do we think about the next plan. And it talked about clarity in defining the strategic goals, attending to the implementation, as well as the creation of a plan, and being a living document. And you'll hear from Provost Hecker in a minute how we're starting to think about those as guidelines for what we're doing. UMaine at Machias, a new partner with us, that's going along well, and we're very excited. I'm very excited about the potential that offers all of us as we think together about our future. Increases in faculty hires in the last 3 years, and I guess I'm here. Okay, so with that, I want to tell you that Provost Hecker will tell you what this is about, but as a result of conversations among the senior leadership here in the summer, out of that has come a charge that I've prepared for Provost Hecker to lead the work of the next stage. It's sort of the next stage of Blue Sky, but that takes you into all kinds of odd speculation about what the title of that would be. Like if it's not blue sky, anything else sounds less. So we may not necessarily stick with that language, but I mean, like you wouldn't want cloudy sky or but we really are serious about using it as a wonderful foundation. And so the provost has been charged to lead this effort, and we will turn it over to him.
Thank you, President Ferrini-Mundy. So yeah, I'll start the story in August when the president brought the leadership team for the campus. Can you hear me? Okay. How about now, Jake? Can you hear me now? Okay. The president took the leadership team, the president's cabinet, off for a day-long retreat just to start the wheels turning to think about what we want to do in terms of creating a strategic plan at that time. That was the language that we were using. And obviously, we weren't going to go off in a day, say, well, we're the leadership group, here's the plan. Right? We wanted to start at least the process of thinking, what are the characteristics that would make for a successful plan? And I want to share some of that with you. As the president has already indicated, there was strong consensus that we shouldn't start from scratch. We shouldn't say, it's tabula rasa. Anything, nothing that happened before today matters. Just the opposite, that we've been progressing in very positive directions in many ways, and we want to build on that success. But at the same time, we learned through the Blue Sky Outcomes report, even though if you took the time to look through the report, it's very positive in its tone and the highlights. But if you read carefully and look back at it, we are also honest about the things we didn't accomplish. And what did we learn about those and what happened and how do we go forward in a different way? Not that the goals were bad, but we weren't able to move the needle on a few things. Also, that process of doing the assessment helped us to understand a bit about what makes an effective strategic vision and plan. And we want to take what we learned from that to apply in our current thinking as we move forward. Another key thing that we discussed that we thought was important is that as we move forward, we want to recognize that there's a lot of good work going on right now, and there's a lot of new initiatives or relatively new initiatives. And we don't want to create a strategic vision and plan for the university sort of over here while everyone else is doing their work over there. We want to make sure that we recognize and that to the best we can integrate the efforts that are going on already. And I'll give you some examples. So I look over Fred Cervello led a process with the College of Natural Sciences, Forestry, and Agriculture, where he and his leadership team went on a listening tour. They talked with the faculty and the leadership, and out of that, they developed a roadmap for the college moving forward. It's a great effort. It's a great document. We want that to be part of our thinking as we move forward. The folks at University of Maine and Machias have been thinking about their strategic plan. Fortunately, the timing is good because they were in the early stages, and their work is going to inform our work, and our work will integrate our thinking. Other examples down at the Darling Marine Center, Heather Leslie led a great process to develop not only a strategic plan for the Darling Marine Center, but also a master plan for their facilities. That's important work. Earlier this semester, Dean Dana and I got out in front of the campus and talked about the First Year Success Initiative. That's important work, and we've thrown ourselves into that. The campus has responded very positively. We've got a lot of work in launching right there. So we want to develop a plan and a vision that integrates these efforts that are already in progress. When we get to our plan, it's got to support nimbleness. Nimble is probably one of the most overused terms, right, that you see now. Everybody's got to be nimble, and fine, we do too. What does that mean? Well, it means I think 100 things, or maybe 1,000 things, that we need to be able to look at the way our processes. How do we do things? Challenge ourselves to think about them differently. If you bear with me, I'll give you one of my least favorite, or favorite, because I use it a lot, examples. So I look, Grant says, I think we should develop a new degree program. I say, great. Take step one of the 34 steps that it takes to create a new degree program at the University of Maine. And by the way, Grant, it's about 2 years is the average length of time for doing that. So go get them. We want to figure out our processes in a little different ways, I would suggest that. And again, that's just one example. That we reflect and say, why do we have these 34 steps? What are we accomplishing by that? What's the goal of each step? And challenge ourselves to think differently. grounded in key indicators. This is one of the things that, again, we learned through the process of going through the Blue Sky Plan, is that we weren't that as clear as we might have been about what the baseline was, about how we would know we had changed the things that we said we were going to change. And we want to be clear. We want to be clear about that. So we want this to be an exercise that, has some depth and grit to it, so that we can see, yes, this is what we're looking at. This is what's important. This is our broad goal. How are we going to know we're moving in the right direction on that goal? What are the key indicators? This idea, the way we're thinking about it now, forget my pointer doesn't work. These two are related. That we want to create a plan. We want to identify important indicators so that we're watching as we go. We don't want to wait 5 years and say, well, how did we do with that? Right? We want to see in a very public way, are we moving the needle on these things? What do we do? What are our strategies? If they're not having an impact, then let's forget about it. Let's try a different strategy, or let's reassess the way we're going about this. Right? So this idea of being nimble is tied to the idea that we're going to keep track in a very public way of our key indicators. Importantly, we need to align the incentives, the resources, with the goals that we agree upon. And if we agree, if we decide these are the things that are important for us to proceed, but we don't change anything about the way we fund things, it's unlikely we're going to be successful. We need to be able to look at to go back to our processes and look at how is it arranged that when things are successful, they beget additional resources, and that we can move things around so that we're responding to needs, that we're rewarding folks for excellence, and we're moving in the right, so that keeps us moving in toward our goals. And the last thing, and I'll spend a bit more time talking about this, is that this plan should be guided by what we as a community, and I mean that broadly, I think are our important values. What are the things that are shared? And we use the term strategic values, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. But that our work should be guided by our values. Now, as I said, this is what we sort of discerned out of a day-long workshop. This wasn't all we took, but this was part of what we just got pulled out of a day-long workshop, and we did the things you all are familiar with yellow stickies and breaking into subgroups, but to pull this out. But one important thing is we're not saying this is it, right? So are there other key characteristics, right? If there are other ideas that folks say, well, a successful plan, you've hit on some things that are important, but here's some other ideas about what makes for a successful plan. If you have a thought like that, take out your cell phone right now and tell us what it is. If you have a thought tonight, go online and I'll show you later how you can tell us what it is. We want this did come out of some thoughtful, reflective work. I should say, we started at that retreat. We continued it in the cabinet meetings to refine it somewhat. But we're not claiming the end of that we've captured the universe of ideas. So again, as you think about what the characteristics, please feel free to share them. Okay, so we came out of that. I'm going to talk a little bit about this strategic values. I want to spend a little time on this. First, let me try to give you at least my definition of what do we mean by strategic values, right? So we all have values, and we've talked quite a bit in the leadership of the university about what are the university's values, and should we be explicit in articulating what they are. And I'm looking at two colleagues, and I'll say here I have Chris Lindstrom, Vice President for Research, who often says, yes, we ought to do that. And I look at my good friend and colleague, Vice President Dana, who says, we don't need to do that. We all know what our values are. They're things that we live and act every day. I'm not going to resolve the conflict between the two of them, but that's why I put Claire between them. The idea, of strategic values, right? We all have values. We're thinking about things that we share, but what makes it strategic? And our thinking is a strategic value is something that will, a shared belief or value that will guide us going forward. It's functional, right? It says these things are important for us, and they should be reflective in our vision for the university and in the plan that we create for the university. So we talked a lot about these, and after talking, sort of narrowed things down, and we've kind of brought them into three broad areas. The first we're calling fostering learner success. Second is creating and innovating for Maine and beyond. And the third, I'll go back. The third is growing and stewarding partnerships. Now, quick catchphrases. Let me talk again about what were we trying to do to catch with these phrases? What were the ideas that we were trying to capture? So we'll start with fostering learner success. You'll note that we didn't say fostering student success, because part of what we're saying is a shared value is that we're a community of learners. And the learners include the faculty, the staff, the visitors to our university, that we want to take the view that we're all learners. And how do we foster that? How do we foster professional development for the folks who work here at the university? How do we create opportunities for advancement? How do we think about the things that happen outside of the classroom as learning opportunities? I'm looking over at our new athletic director who participated via phone calls in this retreat, but who's talked about this as part of what what athletics can bring to the university is learning opportunities, not only for the student athletes, but for the community. How does that become a value that's reflective in all that we do? We've talked already a bit about our culture, the idea of a culture of innovation. Again, the thinking is here is we're all learners. We can do things better. We can do things differently than we always have. And we should be challenging ourselves to be innovative, to learn new ways, new processes. We want this to be occurring inside and outside of the classroom. This is, again, thinking about our students. I think most of you would probably agree that some of the most powerful learning experiences our students have often happen outside of the classroom. They might be in the social organizations they belong to, in the lab that they work in, or in the part-time job they've taken on. We should be explicit in our purposeful, I should say, in our thinking. Are we making sure that these are the kinds of learning experiences we want students to have? To create possible and foster learning, we have to, that diversity is essential. Not only diversity in the makeup of who we are, but in terms of celebrating diversity. But creating an environment where people who are very different from one another can live and learn from one another and accentuate the learning process. Learning should be personalized. There's a lot of recognition, there's been for a while, but that our students come at all different starting points in the vast array of things that they need to learn. And I mean that academically, but I also mean socially and personally. And so helping them to move along in the classroom, one of the things I've been very interested in is in applications of artificial intelligence and machine learning in the classroom. And there's a lot of what they call adaptive learning software they're developing. I'm personally fascinated by this, where you work through, instead of having the sort of early generation software learning things, you do this, then you do this, then you do this. The kinds of mistakes you make take you down different paths and individualizes the learning. That's of course what any good teacher does, but it's also looking at this new generation of tools. But anyway, the broader idea is that we have to recognize and that when we take in 2,300 first-year students, they don't all walk through the door with the same needs and the same starting points in terms of learning. So how do we personalize the learning experience? And our learning should be this fostering learning that leads to outcomes writ large. Okay, our second strategic value, creating and innovating for Maine and beyond. As the President Ferrini-Mundy said, we are the research university. We are the land-grant university for the state of Maine. We are the state's only research university. So the research is at the core of our mission. And so fostering and making, being clear that that's one of our most important values is essential. As a land grant, we need to look at the impact on the state, and that has to be a significant piece of our mission. How does our work inform the state of Maine, contribute to its economic growth, to its cultural development? But of course, we also have programs of excellence that are recognized nationally and internationally, and that's also, again, part of our mission to be an excellent university. We have to create an environment that supports those programs and creates opportunities for new programs to reach that level of national, international excellence. As the only research university in the state of Maine, we have something very unique in terms of our undergraduate experience. Our undergraduates learn within this culture of discovery and creation of new knowledge. And it creates fabulous learning opportunities, from being taught by faculty who are knowledge producers and leaders in their field, to opportunities that students have to work on honors theses or senior projects, capstone projects, or taking on part-time jobs in a laboratory. Those are learning experiences that here at the University of Maine are different than anywhere else in the state of Maine. And again, we have to recognize that we are the comprehensive research university in the state. We have a breadth of scholarship that's very important to fulfill our mission. And the third strategic value is one that I think is maybe more important than ever, if you can think about it that way. The way universities are functioning, public universities, and the president talked about some of the really innovative national universities. Building partnerships. A public university like ours, and like any flagship university in any state in the United States, is not going to grow over the next 50 years the way it grew over the past 50 years. The states are not going to invest large chunks of money to say, yep, okay, this is what we need to do. We need to be looking at how do we think about advancing what we do through partnerships, right? So we have a variety of types of partners, right? That we currently have, and we need to be thinking about growing those and thinking about and stewarding new kinds of partnerships that help us fulfill our mission. So to be clear, what am I talking about? Well, there are all kinds of other educational institutions in the state of Maine. There's all of K-12, and we partner with K-12 in a variety of ways, but we should be challenging ourselves to think about how can we partner even more to advance the K-12 mission, to advance our mission, right? We partner with the community college system. We need to do more of that. We partner, and we've been doing more partnering with the University of Maine system campuses. One of the earlier slides that President Ferrini-Mundy showed, again, I think is really captures one of our key challenges. You see the graph going down of the number of high school graduates, and you see the need for people with post-secondary degrees are going up, credentials going up. Right? These things are inconsistent. If we, in my opinion, to be successful, we need to figure out how to partner with these other types of institutions. If we develop only a competitive relationship with the other University of Maine system campuses, with the community college, with the private schools, we're going to be competing on a shrinking resource, that graph that's going down. And I don't think that will advance the state. I think through partnerships is how we advance the state. How do we help? The community college has a very important mission. How do we help them be more successful in that mission? And at the same time, how do they help us to bring students who are ready and prepared for a research university experience? But the partnerships we're thinking about expand beyond education. So we're thinking about business partnerships. We've done a lot of work in the last couple of years, but there's much more to do around commercialization of University of Maine's research. How, again, do we form partnerships with business and industry to advance our research mission and also advance their missions? A year or so ago, we got in front of campus to talk a little bit about that. One of the interesting graphs was the decreasing federal support for research and the growing support for scholarship among business and private industry. We need to be looking and thinking about that. And again, I say this as if we aren't, and I recognize we do a lot of this. We do a lot of important work. I'm looking at Steve Shaler, does a ton of work with the forestry industry. But we need to continue that and to expand upon it. And even in the way we think about how we go about the business of the university, we've been exploring public-private partnerships as an example of a way of renovating some of our existing buildings. We have beautiful historic buildings that are, quite frankly, out of our price range to renovate, to bring them up to what they could be. But could we bring in a private partner who has goals, who could help share the cost of those renovations? Couldn't we create win-win situations there? So it's got to be a big part, I think, for us to be successful, a part of our mindset. We just say this is a value, at least I believe, that we should share amongst us and guide the way we move forward. Okay. So that's kind of a summary of where the cabinet kind of got to. And as the president indicated, she charged the provost, okay, create a process, and oh, by the way, it needs to be inclusive. You got to get everybody involved. That's important for success. hurry up. You got to do it in a timely fashion. And that, again, I think that's also very important. We've been talking about the landscape changing. The landscape and our context aren't going to stop and wait for us to develop our plan, right? Other universities are changing the business of higher ed. The University of Maine system is moving forward with ideas. We need to create a plan or a vision and an action plan in a timely fashion. So those two things, it's often thinking of as a balance. It takes time to be inclusive, and yet there's a sense of urgency. And we wanted these to be guided, this work as we create the plan, to be guided by our strategic values. So, piece of cake. All right, so what do we do first? We said, well, okay, who are our stakeholders? If we're going to be inclusive, we need to create a process that includes these folks, right? Our internal audiences, our students, our faculty, our staff, the administration, leadership. Obviously, that's the starting point. Engaging these stakeholders in the conversation. What are their ideas? How are they reacting to the way we're thinking? What are their thoughts about strategies to move us forward? We also have, many external audiences. We have the group we kind of label as UMaine stakeholders include our board of visitors, of which I see a member here. Philip, thanks for joining us. We have advisory boards to different colleges. We have the Alumni Association. We have the University of Maine Foundation. Right? How do we bring them into the conversation? We have our business and industry partners. We have our community, and you can think about that in a variety of ways, but the local community of Orono, Old Town Bangor. We're an important piece of that community. The President and I today were meeting with Susan Young at the Bangor Daily News, and she was saying, that the university is a significant employer in this area. We're a significant piece of this community. How do we bring the community into the conversation? Our partners in the University of Maine system and the government. All right, so are we going to do it in a timely way? Sure. Here we go. Today, we're starting a conversation about our strategic values, out of which we hope to be able to, as a community, articulate exactly what those values are. Think about, well, I'll show you some things in a minute. Think of those as drafts, rough draft, intended to instigate, spark conversation. With that, we want to create a shared strategic vision for where we see the university going. We want to do all that by January 30th. Then the next time, okay, so you have a vision where you want to go. All right, what are the goals? What are the goals that you need to set that would realize that vision, right? Large and small. And then you got to articulate the strategies, how you're going to achieve those goals. And to follow through what we said earlier along the way, we need to create this dashboard. We need to create what are our key indicators and how are we going to make sure that that's transparent and people can see. This is what the University of Maine, this is what it's heading for. This is the strategy, the first generation of strategies that we're using to get there. And here's how we're going to know we're making progress. We're going to do all that in time for the President to present it to the University of Maine System Board of Trustees in May. So we need your help. All right. So I'm going to start with these strategic values. I kind of told you sort of in bullet points what we were trying to capture in our thinking. And what we've done is done a first draft of each of those. So the process then, draft of value statements, we did it. Okay. We're going to engage the community in a dialogue. It started today, right? This dialogue will continue, and I'll show you how we intend to do that. But we want to hear from the community. Have you captured what's important? Have you not? What else should be there? Are you being clear, or is it are you being inarticulate? We're going to edit. We're going to share it again. We're going to rinse and repeat as needed. Okay? So the idea, we want to do this in an iterative process, inviting feedback, editing, sending it back out, just like you would with we're the students, you're the teachers. You give us feedback, help us to shape this into something that we all can feel is important and share. So as I said, we sort of did draft one. Well, I'll run through it quickly, but this is our attempt to put some narrative around what do we mean by foster learning success as a value. Why is it, how is it important? And we're going to create ways for you to give us feedback. This is important. But let me try to I'll go through it kind of quickly to highlight a few things. University is a community committed to fostering learning opportunities for all its members. Again, this idea of being inclusive. We create rich learning opportunities in the classroom, laboratory, studio, field, and community, as well as the spaces within which students live, work, and socialize. This idea that learning doesn't just happen in the classroom, but it happens at the rec center, and it happens in where students socialize. We have a commitment to foster that to be successful. We create academic and co-curricular pathways for success and assure that our students are prepared for successful careers and rich lives. We're capturing this idea that we foster learning success for outcomes. We're mindful, what are the learning outcomes? What are the personal outcomes that students should be getting from these experiences? Our faculty and staff are lifelong learners, and we are committed to professional development over the span of their careers. So there's again this idea that we're a community of learners, and we should all be thinking about it in our own personal positions, but in the areas that we work. How do we foster learning not within our own, how do we foster learning for ourselves, but also with our colleagues and those people who report to us who are in those kinds of positions. Our community welcomes learners who do not easily fit the traditional definition of, quote, student, and we are committed to their learning success. As President Ferrini-Mundy talked about, we need to be looking at how we serve the state, even if they're not going to come and register and move in the dorm and be a student. Can we provide credentialing? We do provide credentialing. Can we do more of that kind of credentialing? Are we accessible in the way that we provide that? Can folks who need it get to us, and can they get what they need in a timely fashion, so that we're continuing to serve them as they grow? And we celebrate diversity of our community and are committed to creating a safe and respectful environment with which all learners can flourish. So the idea, not only do we celebrate diversity, which we do and we should, but we do something about it. We make sure that we're creating a community that's welcoming, that people have opportunities to learn, whatever starting point they're at or whatever background they come from. Are we creating the kind of environment that they can learn in? We took a shot with creating and innovating for Maine and beyond. Again, this idea that at the core of our mission is to create new knowledge. We're a research university, and we fulfill it in a wide variety of forms, getting an idea of our diverse forms of scholarship. As a Land and Sea Grant University, we're committed to creating knowledge that impacts the social, cultural, and economic well-being of the state. That's reiterating the Land and Sea Grant mission. At the same time, the impact of our creativity is not limited to the state's borders. As I indicated, we're a national. Our work has impact on national and international levels, and we need to continue and advance that. Innovation is built into our genetic makeup and therefore is present in all aspects of our operation. So here's where we're trying to take and are saying that this value doesn't just apply to us fulfilling the research mission, but it's a value that we want to bring to ourselves in the way that we go about doing things. Can we experiment? Can we create ways to experiment with new ways, new processes, right? So that we're innovating. Can we get from 34 steps down to a whopping 32 maybe, right? Can we get something that can we change our processes in some way? Can we create an environment that's supportive of that? To take the phrase from our friends in innovation engineering, can we create it where we can fail fast and fail cheap, right? And figure out, okay, this is not what we wanted to do, or this one did work, and how do we move forward? We want that to be, again, not only about being a research university, but into the kind of university that we want to be. Our community encompasses designers, builders, makers, and discoverers working in and across a remarkable range of contexts, and we champion this work and apply it in the service of the state, our region, and the world. And the third strategic value, growing and stewarding partnerships. As I indicated, we're a public university, and as that, it's part of our mission is to partner to advance the state. We partner with it in fulfilling the teaching, research, and service parts of our mission. And these partnerships leverage the university's and its collaborators' assets to advance cultural, economic, and civic interests of Maine communities. even when a direct impact on the university's mission is not obvious. So our partnerships are, we do leverage our strengths with other strengths to advance both. But we also have a primary service mission, so we engage in partnerships sometimes when it's the other group is benefiting. It's not 100% clear, but it fits with our expertise because that's part of our mission. In this way, we serve as good stewards of the resources entrusted to us by the people of Maine through their elected representatives, by our many partners in science, industry, commerce, state and local government, and the arts. Okay. Key to all of these is that these are draft. Right? We want your thoughts and reactions to these. Right? Does this capture what we think is important about our mission? Could these values be used to guide the way we think about and develop a plan for advancing the University of Maine? Do we need to add another one? Are there things that this doesn't capture? Or maybe that we can, but we need to work with the verbiage in there to more clearly signal what we do. I think sometimes these exercises, myself, I can get a little cynical. Well, why does it matter? I think they're important because they're the public-facing piece that says this is what the University of Maine is about. And as we move forward, this is going to guide how we make decisions and how we advance. So what we envision is this dialogue amongst everybody. So it's our 2,500 or so, if that's right, employees, ballpark. It's our 11,000 students. It's the, I don't know, 30,000 or so people who live in the community. It's the 1.2 million people who live in the state of Maine. Maybe that's a bit much, but we're trying to reach as broad as we can to have a dialogue. So on the one hand, that's great. On the other hand, that could invite chaos. So what we're trying to do is think about how to guide that. So we wanted the discussion to be guided by some broad questions. And these questions, of course, there are many sub-pieces to them, but we're just thinking of it to start. Imagine the entire university community talking about, do these three statements capture the strategic values that should guide the university's development? Well, I don't know. They seem to. I don't hear this in what you're saying. Can we have a dialogue about that? Okay. Once we can agree, and it doesn't have to be these three, but once we have expressed our shared strategic values, and what should the goals be? What goals should we be pursuing that would realize these values? If this is what we say is important, if this is what we say this is what University of Maine is about, okay, then what goals should fall under that? And then the more practical question, all right, how do we get there? What are the strategies? And again, I'm encouraging our to think very broadly about this. Not only, what are the additional things we should do, but are there things we should stop doing? Are there things we should do differently if these are our values and we want to advance? And the fourth kind of key question would be, what are the key indicators here? What are the indicators of success in each of these strategic areas, these strategic value areas? So, in this sort of, when you can think about things and not have to worry about the practicality, you think, great, so get out there and talk about this and let me know what you think, right? So we want to put a little more organization to that. So how are we going to do this? All right, so this is, we've thought about this as having sort of two broad pieces. We want to engage the university community in a dialogue, and some of what we're going to do is to take advantage of the structures that we already have here, right? We've got an org chart. So I can say to the deans, okay, deans, get out there and talk to your chairs about this, and chairs, they can say, go talk to your faculty about this, find out, and work your way back up the chain. So that is one way. Now, well, let's talk about how we're going to do that. And then it's not perfect, but that's part of it. We can say, okay, at the leadership level, how am I going to collect information about these from the broad areas that are academic affairs, all this chunk here, right? I'm going to ask other people then within their chunk to have some kind of organized, guided discussion and information gathering, so the information has a flow up to I'll show you who in a minute, but up to the top where we can sort of put this together. I used to say this is charging or directing them to, because there's There's not a lot of people you can direct to do anything at the university, but the president can direct me to do something. I can direct the deans. I can ask the faculty. And so I changed my words. But asking, challenging the faculty senate, the student government organizations, the unions, ask them, look, here's an opportunity to have a voice. The faculty senate, I'll show you in a minute, we've invited them to participate in the leadership of this. They have a finance and institutional planning committee. Can that committee take the lead on this? I don't tell the faculty senate what to do. But that could be one way that they would think about doing this. How can we use the structures that we have here so we don't have to reinvent the wheel to get the information? And then from outside the university, we'll be asking the Alumni Association. Say, John Diamond, I don't know how you're going to do it, but figure out a way to try to hear from alums in an organized way. To Jeff Mills, what does a foundation membership might think of this? Our Board of Visitors, we've engaged already, but we'll continue to engage. We'll ask the college advisory boards. So we're trying to use the structures that we already have in place to gather information. And I think that's a good way to go. However, it's not perfect, right? Because the risk you run if you do that is that the information comes up and you end up reifying the organizational structure that you have, right? You don't have, or you maybe impede the kind of cross kind of discussions that we have. We don't want to say, oh, Grant, if you have an idea, you have to work through the Maine Business School. You can't talk with Nuri about it because he's in engineering and he's going to be working with his group up there. So that's foolish, right? So we also want to then create a whole series of open avenues for discussion. Okay? How can we get ideas and foster discussion outside of the organizational structure? So we're starting today. Again, I haven't seen a lot of action on cell phones, but you're probably getting good at doing it discreetly. Send ideas, right? We'll have a dialogue today. We'll start the dialogue today. We'll have 3 other public forum type dialogues. I think they're all here. And we've organized them around these 3 draft strategic values. And again, that conversation is, does this make sense? What's missing? How do we look at this? What strategies should we think about? So we want to have kind of organized, but we've led a good chunk of time, 90 minutes, to foster that. Now, we've also got a website, right? So starting today, there's a camera there, there's a camera there, right? This is all being recorded. The geniuses in marketing communication will make it look good. And then we're going to post it on our website probably by Monday. So if you friends and family weren't able to be here, say don't worry. Go to the website and you can watch this. And on the website, you'll see the PowerPoints will be there. This presentation will be there. And there'll also be a place for people to send in their ideas, thoughts, and suggestions. Okay? And then we'll do the same thing with these 3 forums. They'll be recorded, opportunity for people to observe. Part of the website will link to that forum. You'll see a draft of the value statement, and invite people to give comments, questions, suggestions, ideas on the web. And so the website will grow or change as we move forward. Eventually, what I envision is that after we do a draft, we'll post a new draft on the website, and I'll send a message out to the university community saying, we've heard feedback, we've changed the title, people didn't like fostering student success, it came up, we changed it to this, here's the language, let me know what you think. And we start to try to do that iterative process. But the fourth thing we're calling pop-up dialogues, just because it's kind of a trendy term, but it's the idea that we want there to be a lot of conversation about this. And it doesn't, again, either have to be in one of our organized forums, and it doesn't have to be in your unit, but in any way that groups want to have a conversation, we welcome that. And if we, the administration, can help with that, the offer is out there. So let's say someone says, well, gee, we ought to bring a group together to talk about town-gown relationships. Fine, let us know, and we'll help, right? Contact the Orono Town Council, the Old Town. That's just a hypothetical. You don't have to do it. You can do it independent of the administration. But the offer is out there to try to facilitate what we're calling pop-up dialogues. People that want to get together to talk about something that doesn't fall neatly into our organizational structure, and there isn't time to do it in these forums that we've created. We want that to happen, and we're sending out the broad invitation to just go ahead and do it. Send us the information that you come out of it, or if you'd like help, facilitation in it, we'll help in any way we can to facilitate those kinds of conversations. All right, so then what happens when we get all this information? Well, we're going to have a group of people. We're going to try to digest it, work on it, come to consensus together. Now, there are only 2 names up here because we haven't actually got this populated yet. Because again, this too is draft. If folks look out today and say, you know what, I think the steering committee ought to include whatever, send us that idea. I won't promise it, but I'll promise to give it serious consideration with our team. But this is the way we're thinking. Myself, Andy Egan, who's the, well, it says there, Vice President and Head of Campus at the University of Maine in Machias. We're asking the Faculty Senate for at least 2 representatives. The UMaine Machias Faculty Assembly representatives, members of our Board of Visitors, Foundation Board, students, undergraduate and graduate, representatives from our professional, classified, and faculty unions to participate. This group is going to, again, its charge is, work with this information. My office will, and we have a smaller working team that'll aggregate it and put it into some kind of form and organize meetings for discussion of it. But that's where this group will weigh in. That's the plan. So at this point, we're interested in your thoughts, your comments, your questions. You can send them electronically with your phone. You'll notice the distinguished panel in the back there. What we asked them to do is look at the questions. We did this for 2 reasons. One, to be frank, if someone wrote in something we wanted to be publicly shout out or that, they can censor that. But more importantly, the idea is that they can look and not have to give every single question, but if there are 3 questions that have to do with a similar theme, they can summarize that and say, whatever about that question. So that was the idea of having different folks looking at it, and I asked those 4 people to do it because, whenever you look at information, we all look at it through our own lens, and those are 4 different lenses back there to look at things. So what we envision now is we'll take questions. I think I will start by asking the panel in the back what they've heard, and to give us a question. We'll respond to that. But then we'll turn to the audience who actually got here live and wants to publicly ask their question, We'll kind of go back and forth. So, in the back, who's first up to give us a question?
So, Jeff, you got a mix of questions and responses from about 60 plus attendees, both here and at Machias. Right. Not all of them with their phones visible, but from the back you can see more.
That's great. 60 is great.
We've loosely grouped the comments and questions into 4 areas: research and innovation, which Jake will handle; academic questions, which Monique will handle; process questions that Kim will be responding to, and then couple of questions about the relationship between UMaine and UMaine Machias and the system in the context of one university. So I'll start with that. Really, a couple of variations of the following question came in. Last week we saw the Chancellor's presentation and a brief discussion of one university. How does this strategic visioning process interact with or integrate with one university and the University of Maine system?
I'll take a stab at that. Is this on? Okay, good. Great question, and thank you for it. I think the first way it interacts is that a huge piece of our context is that we are part of a system, and so the partnerships that occur as a result of that, or that could occur to help us advance our mission, but at the same time to be advancing the mission of the system. The strategic value that's about partnerships is one place in which I expect we might see some very clear ideas about anything ranging from how to strengthen the partnership with Machias to other kinds of collaborations that are already in place that we might elaborate, or new things that we might start with other parts of the system. So I think it'll be in the nitty-gritty of what comes in under the partnership piece primarily. I think in general, as we, so I'm of course learning this as I go, but the Board of Trustees will continue to offer guidance and direction, I'm certain, and we'll watch that and we'll make that very central. You'll see things come up on the website as we have information that give even more context, particularly around the state, around what the board is thinking about, and we'll just continue to share that in such a way that that we'll clearly be moving forward in a parallel direction, or a consistent direction with all that, I think.
My only 2 cents I would add to that is that you know, when the chancellor was here last week, I asked him the question about, you know, the future of one university, and I referred to it as being strategically ambiguous. And it could, and if you heard his answer, I interpreted that to be, yeah, we're going to continue to be ambiguous. And I think I can see that in quite a positive way as we build a plan. I think if we come forward with ideas, there's a wide lane for us to come through and say, yeah, this is how we envision the partnerships to advance the University of Maine and to serve the state in partnership with the other, with our sister universities. So I think it creates opportunity for us to bring forward ideas that it isn't a definitive, here's the next thing that happens in the one university plan.
Just one quick footnote to that. Those demographics that we show about the state of Maine, those are being considered, of course, across the system. Every university in the system is paying attention to that, is worried about it. So I think, as Provost Hecker says, we can help to provide some direction maybe that will be interesting and useful for other partners as well.
All right, so how about from the live studio audience? Follow-up question or comments or questions? There's a microphone, a couple of microphones. So.
Yeah, Grant.
Thinking about...
Grant, could you grab that so you can...
Sure. So thinking about things differently, and I like some of the things. At one level, the three shared values are teaching, research, and service. Mm-hmm. They have much nicer names, but that really is what they are, because that's what universities do. But I was thinking as I looked at the first one on fostering learning,
yeah.
On the one hand, when you first introduced it, you talked about, you purposely didn't say student because it was the entire university community.
Yeah.
But then it seemed like as you started drafting it out, you had to make sure you had a line or two about students, a line or two about...
Yeah.
And that seems like that almost takes us back into our separate little silos, and we're all separate people.
Yeah.
So
that's a good point.
That's a good point.
So I think it's going to be a challenge for us as we go through here to think about it, as not to fall back in our old mindsets. And I can see fostering a learning community in areas that all of us share.
Yeah.
The students, the faculty, the staff.
Yeah. That's a great point. I'll say great point, and you take a shot at it. No, no, it's a challenge, and words are important. And so thinking about it, yeah, I think it's a great point. And how do we capture that? You know, what are the right words and phrases in an organization to capture that idea? Because that's what we're interested in. Yeah. All right. How about from the back again?
Hi. We have a question about micro-credentials. So the question is, creating micro-credentials, badges, and so on can be done, but where will the additional resources come from?
So that's a great question. I think we always are in a resource-constrained environment, and so that has to be on the table. You did hear the provost say at one point, he kind of just slipped it in, but he talked about what might we stop doing or do less of, and I think that's always going to be in the mix for us. But at first, I think my advice would be, and ultimately in implementation we'd have to figure out the answer to this. But my advice would be, first, let's just be creative about what we could offer. What do we understand might be needed by people in Maine? What might we understand to be needed by people looking for reskilling or upskilling? There may be ways to associate revenues with those kinds of offerings, and there may be ways to think about how we staff those that also are quite creative. I mean, we think about a learning community here. We can be creative about who gets involved even in the teaching teaching in some of those kinds of situations. So again, a lot to be determined, but I think my recommendation would be let's start with the ideas and see how far we can get with them, and then we'll need to attend to resource issues as we go.
Yeah, I would agree with all that, and say, yeah, we won't succeed if we just see it as an additional thing. You just need to do this, do more. We have to be thinking about, okay, what are we not doing? How are we doing multiple things at one time? How do we get resources to flow so that they are supportive of those things? And again, I did. This is not my first rodeo. I did say it quite quickly, but what are we going to stop? What are we going to stop doing? Are there things that, as we lay this out and this out, we say, yeah, actually, this is really important. This is important, but it's not at the same level. And how do we align our resources in that way? It involves, obviously difficult decisions, but I think it's unrealistic to think, well, all we'll do is bring in additional resources and grow and grow. I don't think that's where things are at. I'd say my other sort of piece to that is this partnerships idea. Are there ways we can find partnerships that will help us and allow us to do this? Business and industry are interested in these things. How do we partner with them to bring additional resources to the table to meet their needs?
Yeah, Jeff, with respect to outcomes, right? I understood the entire planning in UMaine, right? And then at Maine, this thing is brought to the Board of Trustees by the President, right?
Yeah.
What do we envision from that point
that's
on
great.
out of this entire effort,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, thank you. So yeah, we do have some ideas about it. Again, they're not fully formed, to be frank with you, but the idea is that we also then look at we do what we said we're asking the community to do, look at our internal processes. So the vision is that we have these key indicators, kind of a dashboard that everyone can look at. We redesign and rethink like our annual reporting process, right? So you do an annual report, goes to your department, does an annual report, goes to the dean, does an annual report, comes to me, do an annual report. And okay, is that functioning? What goals is that serving? Should we think about that in a different way so that our annual reports are tied very much to these key indicators and that actions come out of them, right? So it's not just this process of collected the data, aggregated, put it up, boom, boom, boom. I don't be that cynical about it because we do use that information, but can we create a culture where we are ongoing and annually looking, all right, your report, I mean, not you as an individual, maybe as an individual, but your unit, is against these things that we all agreed are important. So are you moving the needle on some of these? Then that's great. And we look at how that becomes important in decision making about resources. It also then provides a feedback loop where you say, well, this is how we think student retention. I think most people think student retention is an important thing, and that's your area drop down. It might invite a conversation to say what's happened, not just for 1 year, but we've seen 3 years in a row. Again, that key indicator. Let's look at what's going on. Let's try to solve this problem. So that's kind of the idea, that we're trying to create a culture where we're referencing these indicators and making decisions about them and sharing information around them. So, as you can tell, it's not fully formed, but that's the thinking. I
mean, as the provost is talking, and we'll hear what we have on kind of organizational and process questions, but it strikes me that we'll need your good thinking as well on even the format of the thing that we are producing, right? We tend to think, at least some of us, in terms of brochures and beautiful glossy documents. Maybe this will have some of that, of course, but maybe the main format is not that. Maybe it's a wiki-like thing someplace on the web. We'll need a lot of good creative folks to think about how this thing gets put together, how it's used, and so it's a usable document. And it may be that in terms of these indicators, you chime in and you say, we're only 6 months into this effort at a micro credential in our department, but we're really bumping into this roadblock and this roadblock and this roadblock, as the provost said. Somebody else says, oh, I have ideas about that, but we have an ongoing way that people can kind of keep working toward these ultimate goals. I think designing that as we go is really going to be quite important, and having it maybe early on. So, I don't know, Kim, have we had some questions on process, organization kinds of things?
We have had a number of questions about process and timelines, and including how do we actively include Machias moving forward. Currently the 3 forums are planned at UMaine Orono, so how, at what point how do we integrate? So there were a number of questions about process.
Yeah.
can I ask one of the questions that has come up, which is actually 3 folks have asked about whether we've given thought to including diversity and inclusion, equity and inclusion, diversity and including innovation, which someone mentioned diversity and innovation really go hand in hand. So has the leadership team given thought to how we incorporate that in this process or in the values?
You want to take the first one?
Yeah, I mean, most definitely. And again, it's where you could, you know, you have a goal and then you try to write it succinctly. The intent was to have that be certainly in the first 2, in fostering learner success and in creating creative and knowledge creation. If they didn't hear it, then didn't perhaps succeed at that. But it's what we're looking for, I think, is in this value. Well, you could argue with this. I would suggest not to have it as a separate value, because I worry about it not being integrated into the culture of what we do. So the goal or the intent of what we tried to do is in the language, is captured in the language to say this is central to fostering learner success and is central to creating an innovative, successful university, is being an inclusive environment where all voices are heard. So those responses, if you heard at least 3, suggest you didn't quite get there, and maybe it needs to be separated. But that was the intent, was to have it be embedded right in our values.
So I'll just pick up from that. I would say, because there were at least 3 questions and maybe more, what I would encourage is more detail on that from the folks who are asking the questions or others. What do you think? I think it's an open question. I agree our idea at the beginning was to say, is it fully interwoven and integrated in sufficient ways? Maybe it's not. And so offer that suggestion, and then that gets to be a part of the discussion, and offer wording, offer rationale, because I do think that there would be good arguments for having this as a separate value explicitly. Also, great arguments for integrating it in what we already have. And on Machias, I think we should talk about a forum in Machias.
Yeah,
I mean, we'll look into that. Great thought, of course.
One concrete thing is that this is being recorded. Actually, it's being live broadcast to Machias right now. They might have been the ones who sent you that. We'll do the same things with the other 3, 4. But obviously, we know that's not the same as being there. Andy Egan is taking this sort of same information with his leadership team and initiating dialogue and conversations there. And then we're talking about a follow-up with the president and I, either together or separate, go and have conversations with them about it. Let me just use as one other thing I meant to mention. So in those value statements, I refer to the university, and that was, and it never says UMaine. That was purposeful because we wanted to, Andy has been very clear about this in Machias. We want to think about, the university now is the University of Maine and the University of Maine at Machias. And not only is it awkward to have repeatedly said the University of Maine and the University of Maine at Machias believe this or value that, but it also just promotes separateness when you continue to use the same, both labels. So that was a conscious decision not to use UMaine or the University of Maine, but to say the university as a way of trying to, to get us all to change our language. They are part of us. They are the University of Maine. They're a regional campus, and that's what we want to. That's this strategic visioning and strategic planning process is an opportunity to really take that to the next level. So, Patty.
Having a IT infrastructure that can, handle all the text messages going on in here right now, and having an IT infrastructure, that works in the classrooms and, all of those things. And all of that is extremely expensive. And at a meeting I was attending, I heard the head of IT for the system say, well, when we get done with all of these upgrades, we'll be close to 2010 standards. Mm. And so when I hear the president talk about, cloud computing and the internet and, all of these things, I'm thinking, well, that seems problematic to me. And I don't know where the money comes from because it's not free.
So it's a great point, Patty. I think the challenge is that our students may well go and work in a world that looks, even in a short period, a bit different than the one we're in. And so we face that really hard question of how do we prepare them for that. I didn't mean to imply that we have all of those things rampantly in place in the state of Maine. We don't. But I think it creates, back to the we are innovative, we are creative, we are resourceful here. I think it's going to have to be a part of how we think about where we're headed into the future and be realistic about what the challenges and the limitations are going to be as we go. I think one very concrete thing will be, can we build, and I'm very impressed by all our technology help today, can we build some sort of a collaborative tool or find one that allows us to work on this together at the scale that the Provost has described? That what might be one of our earliest technology challenges. And we'll work with the system and we'll see what we can do.
I'm sorry.
We're no line.
Go ahead. John, you got the microphone.
Provost Hecker, I took note you said we shouldn't reify existing structures.
Yeah.
And one, we're all witness to a raging debate out there beyond the walls of this university about knowledge, facts, information. I just took note of the third value about partnerships, or as a good, succinct service. There's 5 communities in Maine that are not Maine communities that I think we do have an obligation as a university to have a partnership. I'm talking about Wabanaki communities. Mm-hmm. They have distinct governments, distinct history, a distinct place, and I would just point, I could rattle off a lot of suggested ideas how we want to partner with them separately from Maine communities. But I think just in terms of accuracy, a important thing that this university is about of knowledge and information, I think it's important to reflect that in the value.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great point. I think we had a question back there, Amber.
Thank you. So I like the idea of developing this strategic vision and how in-house this whole thing feels, but I'm wondering how much the state government in Maine is really going to have an influence into the final product. Of course, we have the varying levels that we'll go through, and we'll have the board of trustees and so forth that will have the final say. But is there any kind of indication, especially with a new governor and a new House?
It's very early to tell. One thing I would do is go back to history and look at how that worked out with the Blue Sky Plan. I don't know what that process was. My hunch was, from everything I've heard, that was a campus initiative led by the campus, produced by the campus, and then shared. That all said, I think it would be very wise for us to be engaging, as we've just now talked about, a very wide set of stakeholders, including people who have interest in state government, who are part of the resource base there, because they're very interested in what we do and they are great supporters in many cases of what we do. So I would see this as our product. It's the university's product, and we'll go through our usual processes. But in the inclusive part of this, where we think about the state, we're certain, I think, to engage with lots of different groups. I don't imagine that our first engagement with the Board of Trustees would be in May. I would hope to be able to go to them with, with excitement about the shape this is taking, and let them know, give them updates earlier than that, if possible.
The only thing I'd add is, when we had conversations, actually we had these conversations back when we were assessing the Blue Sky Plan, and we continued them as we've been thinking about this. One thing you say is, well, why do you do this? Why do you create a strategic plan? There's a bunch of answers to that, right? If it's a good plan, it guides decision making, it helps, it's a shared amongst communities, so people understand why you've made decisions. But one of the other functions of it is a communication tool to the rest of the world, right? So the legislator is one of the audiences for what we do. And so I think in some ways we clearly want to bring them in. We have a new governor. We had her here. We had all the candidates here. We were equal, but we had all the gubernatorial candidates here as candidates. Partly, again, educating them about the university. But I can, again, envision us sharing this in some different ways with legislators, with the governor and her staff, because it's a tool for, be frank, helping them to understand us better, right? It's a tool for them to say, wow, they're doing some great things there, and wow, they are thinking about the future. So I think it serves a function for advocating or advancing the university. They've got their act together at the university, and they're thinking big and they're thinking about the future. I think, it provides a shorthand for that. Let's go back to our text-in audience.
Here's a research question. How does the research plan due to the Chancellor in January fit into this process?
Great. So you'll remember that the Provost on one of his slides talked about the ways in which we want this to integrate, this effort, this strategic vision values, wanted to integrate with ongoing planning, and we use the NSFA strategic plan and the Darling Marine Center plans as examples. We're thinking of this research plan that has been requested by the Chancellor as another one of those kinds of examples. It will need to link in to this work. It'll need to be it'll need to hopefully fit into these 3 strategic values, or 4, or however many we have. We'll need to see those echoed in the research plan. So as they are taking shape, you can imagine that they're going to make their way into the research plan. At the same time, by early in the next calendar year, we should have enough of the basic ideas of the research plan in place that they'll be, you can bet that we'll be submitting those into this website as potential pieces for this plan. So they will intersect and overlap. The one disconcerting thing about these questions is it's not clear where to look. When someone asks a question, you can look at them. So whoever that is out there, we can follow up on that for sure.
So it is 4:30. We said we'd go to 4:30. Maybe a few more minutes that you have?
Yeah.
So if you need to go ahead. We'll take maybe just a couple more questions before we wrap up. So Jeff, you have given us one.
This is a question for both the President and you. How will this strategic visioning process define success at the end of the day?
You want to start?
I feel a little bit guilty of answering a question with a question, but that's really part of what we're trying to do. We want to come to that by consensus. I mean, I clearly have my ideas about what I think we should be using as key indicators, and I'll guarantee you, they'll come up in conversation. I'll make sure they're represented. But we want to hear everyone else's, right? So the answer is kind of, it depends, right? Because we want people to say, look, this is what we ought to be aspiring to. This is the goal, and this is how we know we'll get there. Again, I could rattle off a few that are dear to me and I think we should be pursuing. But I don't want to do that because I want this really, or we want this to be this process. We bring many voices to it. I suspect we're going to see consensus around important things. That's my guess. And then our challenge is to say, okay, if those are important, what are the indicators that we know we're getting there?
I would just sort of echo what the Provost said. I also think that we'll be able to tell if the plan itself has been a successful undertaking, which is not exactly the question, but I'm going to go to there. If it becomes a working tool that we actually use, if it doesn't sit on shelves, if we see it evolving, if we're able to take it and say, we agreed on this 6 months ago, but this is really a bad idea. We've tried it. We're trying to fail fast and fail frequently, and we've learned something from this. Cheaply, oh yeah, cheaply. Well, cheaply, frequently. But we want ideas to be generated, and then we want to be able to support experimentation and then accountability and assessment of those ideas and their efforts. And so if that becomes something that is a part of how we do business here, at least in some portions of the university, and that plan is something people use and refer to and adjust and make their own, that would mean to me that we have agreed upon some successful kinds of outcomes because we're still using that tool in a way that's helpful.
Why don't we take one more question? Anyone here who's got a question for us? Yeah. James.
I have the mic. I guess I'll ask a question. And it's been bugging me since you went through the narratives on those 3 areas. I understand what will happen. I don't understand the urgency. And I ask that not just from the perspective of where I sit at and how I interact with everything that I do on campus, but why does an undergraduate in my class care? Why does my janitor that comes through and vacuums my office because I have asthma twice a week care? That sense of urgency for the institution seems to be missing. Otherwise, the millennial me comes out and says, it's another strategic plan. We'll have another one in 5 years. That's kind of just a comment in passing.
I mean, it's a good point. I'd say, you write a strategic plan, you want to be optimistic, you want to be about the future, but the context is the context that the president laid out, and the urgency is our demographics, it is our struggling economy and the need for an educated workforce. It is these national universities. I mean, they're people thinking broadly, like, we'll be the university for the United States of America. Those are so I feel the urgency. Obviously, didn't do such a good job of conveying that, and so I think it's there. The challenge is how to convey it without sounding panicky.
And I think to use the process of developing it to understand the urgency that the people you described feel, right? So the student who is very worried about whether they'll be able to afford tuition next semester, or whether they will actually be able to find a job that keeps them close to home if that's their hope, whether they'll be well prepared for that job. I think we need to sort of unearth the urgencies that people in our community feel and attend to those as we put this plan together, because that's really what also will lead to success. If it is responsive to actual concerns and hopes and challenges that people have. We've described how that looks kind of from where we sit, but I think this bottom-up process that we're hoping to enact will give us a bigger picture of what you described. Similarly, I talked a little bit about the changing world of work. That is actually applicable here within the university. Because we will see technological advances in parts of the work that require different kinds of skills in a variety of our staff positions over time. We're already seeing that as I've toured various parts of the campus and heard about what it takes to operate various kinds of machines in parts of this university. That looks different than it did 10 years ago. And so we will also sense some urgency, perhaps, from our own staff and professional staff about what they need to do in a data-rich world. And so just imagine the data that's involved, say, today in admissions, in advising, in financial aid, and so on. So I think that there's another kind of way to elicit some of that, I guess.
Well, thank you all very much for joining us. We will be looking at all the comments that came in. We'll be aggregating that, and that's be starting this this process. So again, thank you for taking the time.
Thanks very much, everybody.